Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Sero Boost. And on this week's episode, we are talking about measuring happiness from personal lives to public policy, which I know sounds like a very big topic, but don't worry, we have the perfect expert in the virtual studio today to talk to us, who's also from Melbourne. But in case you're watching the video recording of this episode, we are doing this remotely because that's what we can do thanks to the internet. And I would love to introduce our guest today before we throw over to him to introduce himself. So today we have Dr. Cahit Guven in the virtual studio. He is currently the global econometrician within the Small Business Insights program at XERO, a global cloud accounting software company. He holds a Ph.D. in economics from University of Houston, USA, and is a well-known applied econometrician. He previously worked at Deakin University for more than a decade, where he conducted research on economics of happiness and well-being. He published influential articles on the subject, and his research was featured at domestic and international media outlets, including Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal. His work on marriage, quality, and happiness was recently featured in Psychology Today magazine. Thank you so much for joining us today, Cahit. How are you?
Thanks a lot. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, great. I mean, we're always glad to welcome guests who would love to be here with us. So as I mentioned to you earlier, your journey sounds very fascinating and you are the expert today. Now I'm curious, this is such a big topic. I wonder how you got into it in the first place and why did you decide that this is your career path?
Lou, when I started my PhD journey in 2003 in the United States, I was planning to do something interesting and also fun for myself because I was basically thinking that I would like to do research something that I am going to enjoy in the rest of my life and also going to help people and also will be very easy to talk to people about, right? Especially, hearing about the economic theory and also some other, concepts, I actually found them very hard to, engage with people. So at that time, I was actually talking to some of my advisors and realized that, a recent, area of research has recently emerged in economics, which is called economics of happiness. And I started, basically looking into the concept, indeed read, I will say, more than 30 or 40, different books on psychology from different sociology and so on. I actually went to the library at University of Houston and started reading. I actually read more than a year and realized that this is a topic that I really would like to, conduct research on. And to tell the truth, at that time, until 2000s in economics, there were not more than 4 or 5 papers written on the topic. And so I actually started my journey, writing about the impact of happiness on economic decisions, on consumption, savings, and risk-taking and stock market participation. And it was a very interesting journey for me. But what happened was in my third year of PhD, after, working on some of the topics, I actually went to Italy. And, in this very nice and amazing place in Siena, in a monastery on the top of a mountain, I attended a well-being conference there, and which was basically attended with lots of other very well-known, people on the happiness economics. And that's really, I actually realized that this is going to be a very important topic in the future. So I basically made up my decision, and there I started to, research those topics on. I basically met with different people there, that co-authored on different projects. And that's actually how I started to study on this topic.
Wow, that's fascinating. I mean, each person finds something different, interesting, right? And so when you were saying, oh, like I want to find something that would be so interesting that I want to, do for the rest of my lives, it would have a great impact. That is really inspiring. At the same time, you can kind of see that for different people, that would mean different things. Or for you is the economics of happiness, for example, but for others, it could be an entirely different topic. And that's what's so fun about talking to all of these experts on the show, because every time I talk to each and every one of you, I feel so inspired, and I hope our audience will feel the same way. So before we go into today's topic, we have a little section we called Have You Met Cahit, where we get to know you a little bit better. Because what is a better way to get to know someone than knows what they consume, right? So my first question, which is my favorite one, is what is a book you would recommend?
I was actually reading about a book about the top, I guess, 20, civilizations of history. Again, recently got actually from the library. I am actually I'm very invested in history. In it, that's what I did in my research as well. And I truly enjoyed it. Learning about how, the civilization started with different empires and, countries, like from Akkadians to Romans and to the Ottomans, and how they basically, engage in different parts of science and knowledge and carry down this to the rest of the other civilizations. I actually found it very interesting. I think there are different, books on the topic, but I truly enjoyed this. And I really suggest the readers, if they have some time, to go and actually look for, books on this, where they can actually find how our knowledge and science has been transferred throughout the history, through different civilizations.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. I've never heard that before, so it's certainly interesting for me. Thank you. How about a movie recommendation?
Well, I guess, I'm actually a big movie fan, so I actually watch, most of the recent ones. But I will rather actually go to a TV series, if I will say so. And I will actually recommend, if anybody didn't see, and watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine. That's actually that's my happiness boost per se, right?
So good.
What I actually do is, during the day, I actually working entirely from home, thanks to Xero's flexible working. And during my lunchtime, I take my lunch, open my Netflix, and open the, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And within that, half an hour, I am totally, out from everything else and just focusing on humor and fun. And and that's actually, one of the things that I enjoy most.
Yeah, I love that. That sounds great. I love Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and I do something very similar. But the show that I've been watching during my lunch breaks the past few months have been The Big Bang Theory for the 10th time. So that's what I love.
Well, indeed, I actually have been watching it a lot. Currently passed on to the, and my second recommendation will be called The Superstore on Netflix as well. But Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I guess, will definitely be my
yeah 99, right? It's great. I love it. Yeah. Okay, cool. How about a podcast recommendation?
I actually listen to New York Times a lot while actually jogging and running. So and they actually talk about all of the news around the world, but on a very quick sense, within 5 minutes or so. And if my audience didn't have time, I will really recommend to go on to New York Times and listen to podcasts, which is basically a very good way of catching up with the world events, science and history, and from everything else. Personally, currently for my own work, I actually listen to New York Times a lot.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, very on brand with the work that you're doing. So that's great to know. Next question is about your role model. I know it can be a little tricky to find a famous role model sometimes. So if you have a famous role model in mind, that's okay. If you don't have one, a personal role model would also work. Or even better, you can recommend both.
Yeah, I think I have an international one. I'm actually a big soccer fan. I sometimes need to, get up early at 3, 4 a.m. to watch the Premier League. And and I will say my role model is Jurgen Klopp, the coach of Liverpool. I actually have been watching him over time when he was in Borussia Dortmund and so on. And what I actually love about him is, the way he smiles and connects with his players and with audience. I am amazed with it. Even, when he loses, he's still smiling. It shows that he's enjoying what he's doing. It's not purely competition. He's enjoying what he's doing. And I guess that's why the players are enjoying, working together with him. And that's actually a great role model with me that indicates that I need to enjoy myself, through my work, through my life. There is accomplishments will be great, but sometimes I will fail. But I should have the capacity just to, smile and laugh at them and just go continue. And I guess this will be actually a good way of also, having a good approach in our, teamwork as well. And I think in terms of the teamwork, aspect, that's I really admire.
Well, I'm not a huge soccer fan, but you just sold the biggest soccer mystery ever. Now I know why people love soccer so much. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And last question, what is a course you've completed that really left a strong impact on you?
Of course. As I was indicating earlier in the podcast, I finished my Ph.D. in economics at the University of Houston in there. And during my 5 years, I guess this really, had a huge impact on my life. Currently, most of the people that I connect and know from my basically, supervisor to friends to people I know. I actually stayed in Houston and Texas for 5 years. So I have a, big influence of who I am. I actually still watch the Rockets. I went to NASA, several times. So all of this stuff, I guess, it had a very good impact on my life. And if people actually go ever to the United States, I know that most people, would like to go to California and some other like Florida, most of the touristic states. But I guess, especially to learn about how the people view life, I guess Texas is a great state to be.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. And thank you for sharing that. Now, let's talk about today's topic because we are talking about measuring happiness. I think a big part of your history, especially professionally, has been about learning about this topic, right? And I feel like it's going to be a great opportunity for you to share with us a bit more context because obviously in everyday life, we don't think too much about public policy. I would say, the average person like myself, I don't really, read the news. I don't care too much about politics because that's just not really my, my happy place. But it's really good to learn more about it. So for some of us, we are going to learn something new today. For other people, it will be a chance to reinforce their knowledge. Now, before we go into that big topic, the big question we always ask on this show is, what does happiness mean to you, Cahit? Because it means very different things to different people.
That's correct. And indeed, I'm going to argue a little bit, through our podcast that even though it actually means different things to people, arguably, I will actually say that, happiness is kind of universal as well. To me, I guess it's about being satisfied with myself, but also perceiving the fact that my quality of life overall is good. And I'm actually content with my quality of life. I guess that's kind of the, the definition of happiness I will give myself. And indeed, what we do as economists is that, we actually try to find these very easy, single item questions to actually measure, happiness rather than, psychologists where they actually go through with 12 or 20 or 30 different questions. And so what we actually ask a person is, on average, how happy are you with your life as a whole, on a scale from 0 to 10. And we actually ask these people where 0 is totally unhappy, 5 is neither happy nor unhappy, and 10 is totally happy. And we actually ask people and rate their happiness on this scale. And even though people actually will argue that at the beginning of this research study, this actually differs across people, across countries. Why are we going to need this? But it is not correct. So this actually is a very good question. And indeed, I will say that even though technically people actually use this life satisfaction and also, subjective well-being differently. Once we talk about happiness, you can actually see that in academic life or research, people actually can use life satisfaction or subjective well-being interchangeably as well. So once you hear about these words, you can understand that these are generally the same thing. And even though there can be some small, differences, pretty much they are actually, measuring the same metric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. It's very different for different people, but it can also be universal in the sense that we are all humans. So there gotta be some anchors there that make us happy, right? And because we are all humans, we might also encounter the same pitfalls. So as an economist yourself, as someone who's worked in this area for so many years, what do you think to be some of the biggest misconceptions that people have when it comes to happiness?
Sure. I think one of the first misconceptions is about, who studies happiness in the world, right? And as I indicated, generally, the first thing comes to our mind is psychologists or sociologists, right? But as I indicated, since 2000, there has been an explosion on this topic, right? I will actually say that until 2000s, maybe there were more than 4 or 5 papers written on this topic in economics. Within 5 years after 2000, more than 100. And since 2000s now, I will probably can argue that there is actually more than 1,000 papers already, right? And there are lots of conferences, workshops, so many people actually doing PhDs on this topic. And, this is, I guess, one of the first misconceptions. And it's not only economics, but also in finance, in behavioral finance, for instance. Lots of people actually, conduct research in this, area. This is number one. And number two is, once we actually talk about happiness, people, especially when I actually first started, people are always thinking, is it comparable from person to person? Is it purely subjective, right? I mean, or, does it the same thing if you ask about a person's happiness in China versus in the US? There are cultural differences. So can you really compare it, right? But what we actually found is over basically the last 20 years in all of these studies, indeed, once you look at the correlates of happiness, like what makes people happy or unhappy, this is pretty universal. Like, for instance, unemployment makes people unhappy in every country, right? Or, once we actually look at the relationship between health and happiness, it's the same. If you have better health, you are happier. In every country, this is the same. Or if you actually look at some other, indicators, for instance, some of the stuff that I have worked on, the relationship between gender and marriage, right? And especially, some other macroeconomic indicators that we are actually interested in a lot these days. Inflation, right? I mean, so higher inflation makes everybody unhappy, right? And indeed, what we actually found is that around the world, once we look at these relationships, this is universal. So which actually means that these actually variables are useful to do research. And in a sense, with some econometric models and techniques can be compared across countries and regions and people. And also another misconception is that, people generally believe that once we talk about happiness, how can I use it? But indeed, around the world, especially with the explosion of research on this topic, now there are lots of freely available data sets around the world. So, for instance, there is a panel study, which means that in Australia called HILDA, which is actually run by the University of Melbourne, where you can actually follow more than 15,000 Australians with their happiness levels each year for 20 years. So even you have in Germany such data sets where you can compare the same people over time for more than 30 years. And now there is this European social survey where you can actually compare individuals' happiness across all the countries in Europe, or even World Values Survey, which basically asks people about their happiness across the world. So which means that for anybody who would like to do some very easy work, the data is free. Lots of very high quality data are available, and these are basically very useful to do research. And also overall, I will actually say that most people do not actually think that, once you talk about happiness, do people really use it in public policy, right? But currently, the OECD, World Health Organization, World Bank, they are actually continuously collecting this data and also, publishing reports on this topic. Mm-hmm. And so recently you might basically have heard that Australia this year, which has already run but New Zealand and the country of Bhutan before, right, now starting to have well-being budgets. So which means that now in their budgets now we are basically looking at these concepts and improve how we can improve well-being, right? And in some countries like New Zealand and Bhutan, it's actually in the constitution where you basically look at one of the basic ideas is not only to improve GDP per capita, but also to improve the happiness of the individuals, right? And I actually believe that some of these misconceptions is actually going to disappear soon,
Interesting. Well, I hope so. I hope that misconceptions will start to disappear, because I've heard way too many of them on this show. And I agree with all of them because, each expert brings in a very different perspective. And from your point of view, it's very much related to, policy. And I think that's where it's kind of tricky for the everyday people to understand, right? Because a lot of the times we kind of see, okay, this is being introduced in this country, or this is being introduced nowadays in, like this region or area. But what does it mean in practice for each person? That is something that is probably not seen most of the time. And, the part where it gets applied is also the tricky part, because let's say it's introduced, there's a budget and, each organization can benefit from it. But how it's used as well is not something that would probably be standardized, perhaps. So, there are so many variables that the everyday people would probably not see.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, on a note, I also would like to add that the first time this actually literature started in economics is people were always thinking about, more wealth or more money should bring more happiness, right? But a common misconception, I will say, around the world. But once we actually looked at the data, economists actually found that, across the countries, higher GDP per capita was not, significantly related to, higher happiness in that country. Or once we actually look at the relationship at the individual level, this is not what we have seen as well. As I indicated, we can follow the same people over 20, 30 years with the happiness data. Now, once we actually look at and do some analysis, we find that as individuals' income increases, happiness increases only up to a certain point. And after that, what we call as absolute income, like your own income, doesn't matter anymore, right?
Yeah.
So these are some of the misconceptions that's actually started this literature. And people are actually finding in right now that it is not the case anymore.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think it's not uncommon to hear about that anymore. However, I would also argue that there are still people that didn't know about it. There are still people that would come and probably say, well, more money will make me happy. Why? Because they haven't heard about it. They probably didn't take it in. It's also about the filter that we all have, right? Because we all filter for different kinds of information at all times. And while some people believe in learning more about happiness, which would be, those people that tune into our show right now, there would also be people that think that their way of viewing happiness would be the correct way? Or, the way that they were brought up means that, the way that I see it, happiness needs to come thanks to money. So it's going to be really hard. And I guess that's where policy, it's like a really interesting space to be in, because I'm sure there are ways that we can make this happen and bring the knowledge to more people. The easiest thing to do, and in my opinion, is just through education, because most of us nowadays go to school, and that's where we get the first bits of information ever. So, let's go to topic now, because I feel like we've covered like the happiness side of thing. But let's talk about the other part of the picture that we wanted to measure, because we were talking about personal lives and public policy. So what is that relationship? And I think in the context of this conversation, our team sort of researched and put together that, okay, you know what, is related to social responsibility. Right? Because this is where we connect our lives to public policy and other things that are going on out there. So how do you define social responsibility in the context of measuring our happiness?
So social responsibility is, we can actually say this, the responsibility of individuals, organizations, or businesses, right? In general, for the collective well-being of the country and also the world. And this is, I guess, much more on the side of having this idea that, we actually need to, to be helping to the greater good, right, overall. Indeed, there is actually two sides of it. Most of the side is about the individuals. Personally, my own research, mostly I actually looked at the relationship at the individual level, right? Individual, responsibility and individual happiness. But on the other side, there is actually a greater research that we can tap, I guess, in the forthcoming questions on corporate social responsibility, which is much more a topic of basically management and business as well. But, that's actually an important topic as well, especially related to, environmental sustainability and how the businesses and firms, rate their own, ESGs these days. We hear that a lot, especially for the firms, like which are on the stock market and so on, right? But this is actually one aspect. Another one is, in economics, we also actually have a concept called social capital. And I guess that's actually the concept that I'm actually going to spend a lot of time talking about it today, because this is kind of the action side of it, right? So if you actually take social responsibility on a positive note, and, and how do we actually measure this? We actually call this as social capital in economics, which is basically the overall, which is like different actually measures that we are going to talk about. But the social capital is the action part of the social responsibility, where you basically do for the greater good and actually create some social capital for your own country or for the whole world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely where we're going to learn a lot of new information, because you're so right in saying, this is where a concept that probably don't get mentioned as often. And this is maybe a new thing to a lot of people. It's definitely new to me. I know a thing or two about corporate social responsibility because I studied that at uni, thankfully. But yeah, I think we'll go there and talk about social capital. Now, I'm curious to know, because you mentioned a little bit about the work environment, but we're living in a society, right? It's not just work or at home, the relationship we have with other people. We also need to measure this in the context of a whole society. So social responsibility, you already defined it, but how do we actually measure it? In your research, I'm sure you probably would come across indicators. So what are some indicators or factors that you would consider to be amongst those that can assess our level of social responsibility in society?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. As I was indicating about these misconceptions, indeed, there are the increasing availability of high quality data on these topics, right? And also, where we can actually measure it at the personal level, regional, or the country level over time. And personally, I will actually, use different, measures in my own research. One of them is, we basically looked at, the events or networking. So which actually means that, the amount of community events or social gatherings, right? So this can actually be at the individual level, but you could also actually, through this data, measure at the, country and at the regional level, right? So this can actually be, the number of events, but also the frequency of participation, like how often people actually participate in these kind of cultural, or, social or community-like events. So this is actually one very important aspect of social capital, which is actually called much more about the network, social capital. On the other hand, we basically have a very important measure called trust. And people will be basically maybe excited to hear that, well, trust, how do we actually measure? Indeed, just like happiness, once we ask people about their interpersonal trust, on a scale of 0 to 10, like how likely you actually trust a person in your country or, to another stranger. So this can actually be asked with respect to different, points of origin. But this actually variable is available, especially in World Values Survey, European Social Survey. And this is actually a very, very good measure of overall social capital in a country. How much do people actually trust to each other, right? And we actually call this as interpersonal trust, but also this can be institutional trust, meaning that, how much do you trust in the institutions in your country? For instance, this can be in the judiciary, parliamentary, right? Or this can be in the, media space. So this is also another important aspect of social capital that we actually measure. Also, we basically, have different measures of what we call as civic participation. And, in Australia, even though, voting is compulsory, right? As we know, not many people vote, not all of the people vote, I would say. But actually, in other countries, like in the US, it's not compulsory. So in most of the other countries, so, the percentage of people who vote or, how likely you vote is a very important predictor of the social capital in that country. So it's actually used quite often by economists and also by political scientists as well. And similarly, we also look at media consumption. So, how often do you read newspapers or how often do you actually watch TV? So indeed, these are the questions that we have been, considering 10 years ago. But now things have changed. So with social media, now you can actually ask your media engagement on different aspects, right? With, social media platforms. So you can actually ask how often do you engage, reading your Twitter feeds or, like newspaper sites and so on. So these are also important points. And also in terms of basically shared public goods, we also look at, for instance, the availability of resources such as libraries or books or community organizations. So these are actually also, some of the measures that are available to researchers. And lastly, I would like to basically note that, donations are also a very important part of economics research on social capital. And indeed, people actually use a lot of data on not only to, donation by money, but especially donations of blood. So blood donation actually is used as a very important measure, which is basically, free from, monetary gains. That's why actually, I guess people actually like the use of. So, you don't gain anything. It's basically just for the purpose of really, donating, your blood and, for the public good, right? So I guess on a different basically level, these are actually different measures that we can find in the data. And sometimes what people do is that if they have the, resource availability, they can come up with their own measures. But most of these measures that I told about can easily find in different data sets and can easily be found in different databases and compared across the world, right? And indeed, every year there is this, report called World Happiness Report that we actually see every year, which is the happiest, nation on earth. And in this report now, we are actually going to see that maybe 60, 70% of this report is not about happiness, but it's about social capital. So it actually talks about different measures of social capital and also how it relates to, happiness in different countries. And also, as as a whole world as well.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds to me like, I'm no researcher in this area. I'm also, as I said, not that engaged in politics and understanding about what's going on as often. But it sounds to me like it clearly shows that social responsibility has to do with how engaged you are with what's happening, in the world around you, and also how much you contribute to society. And that can, take many shapes or form, right? Blood donation is one of them, but I also know that, perhaps you can even measure, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, how much people, let's say, give to charity. That could be another thing.
Exactly. Like there are all, indeed, different data sets that you can actually measure, like donation of monies to different charities, as well as volunteering, which is actually a very big part of it, right?
Absolutely.
So what you are suggesting is like volunteering by, not your money, but also volunteering with your time, right? So,
definitely.
People's time is very important, but now giving, let's say, 1 or 2 hours of your time and, like volunteering, let's say for your, community or neighborhood organization, or, helping basically people that we can actually talk about, I guess, in the future about, especially in Australia. We are actually living in, the country of, immigrants, where, the newcomers and so on. I guess this is actually a very important concept. And around the world now, these are actually different measures that we can actually look at how the social responsibility, right, is measured into social capital, and it ends up basically greater happiness in those communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I guess, it's a broad spectrum of different things we can look at because, again, I think to my translation, it sounds like it's a degree of how connected we are to, the environment and the culture and the place we're in, and also a broader perspective of the world, right? Because especially when you live in Australia, like a country that has so many people from all over the world, it broadens your perspective and you care about more issues. And I guess, even though I don't follow the news, I do learn a lot from friends who are from, different nations. And that broadens the perspective that gets me to think, donation wise, like you said, so true. We can donate our time and or money. And one thing that is related to the topic of this podcast is obviously we're talking about happiness. And I know in your research and in your studies, you probably look at both happiness and well-being. So we know that we're doing all these good things. We're staying engaged with, the world around us, and we give back, within our capacity. Now, how does that impact our happiness and well-being?
Let me actually first talk about in general, like the findings from different research. Then I can talk about a little bit my own. Around the world, what we actually find is that people who are much more socially engaged in their community, right? Generally, they actually report greater, levels of well-being. Just being connected to the greater, community or with your friends socially, this is actually better for you. And also, this is better your not only actually your subjective health, but also your objective health as well, like together, right? Indeed, I can actually just explain one. Basically, one of my colleagues did an interesting study where actually they look at blood pressures around the world as an objective measure, and they actually find that people are actually who are happier, right? They have lower blood pressure. So, so we were talking about different actually measures of happiness. There you are. Maybe you can actually use some of these, as an objective measure. Definitely, like medically, it's not, possible to measures everybody's blood pressure at the same time. But this is actually something to keep in mind. But on the other hand, indeed, what happens is that once you basically engage in these activities, like donate money or volunteer, we basically see is that in psychology, there is this called happiness hormone, this is endorphin. And once you engage these activities, this hormone is basically activated, and we actually suddenly feel happier and energetic, right? So this is actually one part of it. And also it actually creates a sense of belonging and connect. So for instance, we especially see this not only in basically local communities, but also from the immigrants as well. Indeed, in my own research, I actually have done a lot of research on immigration and integration as well, especially being in Australia. And there is a lot of research on this, and it actually shows that, for the immigrants who actually move to another country, once they are basically this kind of social capital, like volunteering and other activities, they are more likely to belong to that country, right? And they actually feel much more belonging to basically the country that they are living in. But also from the natives, people who are even born in that country, they feel much more connected to their countries and values, right? And also a community, I guess, where we basically have greater, activities, especially at the neighborhood level. We actually see that it's much more safer. People actually feel safe and connected. And, even actually, if you look at some of the, crime statistics, you actually see lower crime in those places where there is greater, community level activities. So, which is actually also very, very good, right? And also there is this actually long-term benefits that we actually see especially in a lot of economics and finance studies. They actually find that once there is greater social capital in a region, it's actually better for the long-term economic growth. There are much more jobs available because it is safer, right? People are more likely to invest in those areas. And also we actually find that there are actually fewer social conflicts. So which means that if there are fewer social conflicts, you don't need to engage in extra legal, barriers for business. So which actually means that now there is actually fewer costs for the business, right? So you don't need to engage in all of these activities. So overall, what we actually see is that it's better for the business and for the people as well. Even actually, we find that, greater social capital is, also associated with much higher stock market participation, for instance, because now people are finding it safer. They also find it safer to invest in these risky, assets, right? So overall, there is this huge economic aspects of basically, and which actually leads to greater happiness as well. And also, what we actually find is that once there are greater social capital, we can actually engage all of these measures into our holistic view of the well-being, as we talk about this, general like well-being budget, right? Or, GDP per capita. But if we engage all of these activities like blood donation, volunteering, so we can actually have a better measure of targeting from the, policy perspective. And overall, which actually will, I guess, lead to better, quality of life and better health outcomes.
Yeah, definitely. Because it all starts from the big picture, right? We can't really say that we are happy if, people around us are going through something collectively that is miserable. And I think it kind of reminds me of, something that happened not that long ago, because we're both from Melbourne, so we know what I'm talking about. Absolutely. I mean, look, to be fair, I think what happened needed to happen. So we could all get out of the pandemic. But, the number of lockdowns in Melbourne definitely was just crazy, right? And I remember talking to my colleagues at the time, and at the beginning, we were very optimistic about it, and we were all saying, this is for the best. And we know that we're all going through the same thing. This is okay. And then later on, I think in the second year of all the lockdowns, I guess everyone just kind of had enough. That even the most positive people started to crumble a little bit. And, people started to talk about it more openly. And I guess, in a way that really showed that, whatever happened in the big picture really affect us, day to day. And that was like the clearest example of what was happening that was impacting each and every one of us. But then there are other things that are not as tangible. We don't see them all the time, right? And even though sometimes things improve, we don't benefit from it directly. So we don't really have that ability to say, this is great. So I think it's like a really slippery slope, because it's hard sometimes. You're kind of like, this is happening and this is great. And then you look at the whole thing and you're kind of like, how does that affect me? Because my happiness and the happiness of other people, sometimes they don't really correlate. But that also goes with the culture of the community of the local area, right? And so I think my next question to you would be related to that caveat, because we have different cultures, different kinds of interaction. In a country like Australia, I've noticed, especially through the pandemic, I'm not from around here. I moved here a few years ago, and I noticed that here people are really individual. Like they're focused on what they want, and they really want that. Whereas in other communities, for example, Vietnam, where I'm from, people are great. They're just kind of like, okay, we're a community. We're going to go through this together. It's all fine. And they're very much happy to be, miserable together. And that sort of brought happiness. So what are some of the, correlations that might be there when it comes to social responsibility and our overall happiness levels that are measured, in different regions or countries or, even local areas?
Definitely. I actually did a, very interesting study on this topic, which was cited quite often. It's called, Are Happier People Better Citizens? So this was the title of my paper. And,
okay.
The paper actually talks about the following. Like, in general, we actually talked about this relationship, but how does it go? Like, there is this also, story that we called about causation. Which one actually causes the other one, right? But let me talk about the relationships first. So in this paper, what I did was I actually look at this United States, like in the whole United States. Like there is a survey called General Social Survey, a European Social Survey, which basically includes data from all of the people living in greater, whole Europe. And also Germany, which is basically one of the countries which is an amazing data where you can follow people over 30 years with the happiness data, right? So in these countries, what I should have found is that people who are basically happier, right, they are actually more likely to vote in an election because like elections is not compulsory there. They are actually more likely to perform volunteer work and also, more frequently do this volunteer work, right? And also they are more likely to do, volunteer work for the charities, but also they are more likely to donate money and blood. So in a sense, we actually find that not only trusting another person in your own country, but once we basically ask people, how much do you trust other strangers or your neighbors or other people from other countries in your country? As we are like living people, in diverse, communities, we find that overall, these are very highly correlated. Like for instance, in the US, we find that trust to strangers highly correlated with happiness, right? Or in European Social Survey, we again find the same thing. Also in Germany. So overall, this trust, interpersonal trust, or trust to other institutions are highly correlated with basically individual happiness levels. And also, what we actually find in this paper very interestingly was, indeed, there is an inverted U relationship between happiness and social capital. So, which actually means that we actually always get the idea that regardless of the level, as my happiness goes up, always I should basically, do greater good. But in my paper, I actually find that there is an inverted U relationship, which actually means that that's correct that, happiness level, goes up a little bit. But if you become actually very happy, right, you might not do a lot of good for your community. So, and indeed, my explanation in the paper is, this is actually probably working through what we call as optimism, right? So what actually means that if you are a happy person, you are optimistic about the life, right? And optimistic about the future. So, for instance, you are optimistic that you are going to live longer. You are going to have a great life. Things are going to be great. So this actually now comes to your mind that, if this is the case, I need to invest in my community. I need to invest in my, environment, right? I need to do a better job of taking care of the others around me because I know that I'm going to live longer and I'm going to live and things are going to be great. If you are pessimistic, you are not going to have this feeling. Why do you care about the others, or why do you, invest your time in, volunteering, for instance, right? But on the other hand, what we find is that if you are unhappy, but also too happy, this is not really good. There's an optimum level of happiness, which is actually good for social care. But interestingly, as I indicated, this very significant relationship between, volunteering, between trust, donating blood, donating money, and charity, these are present in the United States, across all of the regions, in European countries, but also in Germany. And this was one of my basic papers that I looked at. But as I indicated, there is this, World Happiness Report which goes out every year, which actually ranks individual countries based on their happiness level, which actually uses data from lots of other data sets. And here they actually find this significant relationship all over the world around the countries. The relationships are not exactly the same, one-to-one. So which means that, for instance, let's say that the happiness and trust relationship can be stronger in one country versus another one, but it exists in every country, right? I think you are right in the sense that there are these cultural differences. And I guess that's why we actually see this, maybe the relationship between blood donations and happiness, being stronger in one country than another. But at the end of the day, it is present in every country. So nevertheless, I think this actually topic overall, it's getting more and more attention. And hopefully throughout the media, we can actually see all of these studies and understand that regardless of every country, we see this relationship.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is always there. And even if, countries have their differences, cultures have the differences, we sort of share this common understanding and in a way sort of a goals to understand the economics of happiness and social responsibility and that relationship, right? Because if we don't understand the relationship, whatever public policy, gets released or, gets announced, will probably not be in alignment with that, which is why my next question to you would be, what are some policies or interventions that would actually, promote this sense of social responsibility in the context of boosting, our collective happiness or even individual happiness per se?
Yeah, definitely. Once we actually look at this correlates of happiness, there are some, what we call as individual, correlates or individual covariates, which means that my own sense. But there are actually some other things which I am affected from my environment, from my city, from my region, but from my country, but also from the whole world, right? So in a sense, some of the things that is directly on us, we cannot change them, right? But some things that we can actually do change them, and we can actually influence the happiness and social capital as well. I think some of the policies that we have been talking about, especially these days we hear this about, is supporting this mental and physical health, programs that we see a lot. And for instance, since you actually moved here, but, around the world, in Victoria, especially we have seen these natural disasters are increasing around the world. Even in, I have done actually research on, in the Asia Pacific countries where there is lots of like floods and typhoons and, fires these days. And what we actually see is that after these kind of events, people actually do not, feel very good, right? You're actually losing your loved ones. You're actually losing your, if you're a business owner, your business, your investment, your money. So I guess there needs to be a greater investment in this aspect, not only, of course, from natural disasters, but as a whole, which is actually promote greater, happiness and well-being. So I guess this is going to be very important in the future. Mm-hmm. And also, we talked about schools and education and environmental, campaigns. So I guess this is somewhere where we can actually, educate the kids. So to the importance of, happiness, taking care of themselves, but also, socially being connected to their community and volunteering and being a good member of their community. How does it valued, right? I guess this is a very important concept that we can, campaign this around schools and, do a public policy, aim. One of the stuff that I actually talked about is corporate social responsibility is, where, the governments are taking a lot of action these days, as we know. Only one part of this about is environment, right? About this, currently we actually are talking about this, climate change, pollution, and what the businesses can do. And one aspect is the government policy is basically putting up extra taxes, right? If you, pollute the environment, or, currently we are actually seeing that, especially for those firms which are on the, share markets, they are actually, much more, I will say, compelled to, release their ESG ratings. So how much, for instance, they do invest in their community, or how much do they invest in, overall their environment and so on. So I guess these are the different, basically, public policy actions which are actually the governments are taking for the, business work. But also, there is this different platforms that we can actually do where, for instance, we can actually, create some platforms at the neighborhood level, city councils, for instance, where people can be much more engaged in their communities. And sometimes I actually find this, once there is events like this, I am more likely to attend, right? If within your city council, you actually say, oh, there is this festival, even we actually look at online, I go and, basically am much more engaged, right? Or if you actually see, volunteering opportunities, or you will actually see, if there is an opportunity, why don't I actually become involved? I guess we need to be, as a community, creating these opportunities, but also publicizing them. Sometimes I actually people ask me, do you know what kind of opportunities are out there? For instance, at my company, there are actually people who are involved in this. They are constantly updating, different opportunities for us. There is actually different days that you can actually volunteer. This is, like for free.
Cool.
So, I actually looked at these options. Oh, why don't I actually do this? And, the company is actually giving this free options, like for the people who volunteer. And you can just go and do that together, right? And I think also is inclusive growth, policies as an econometrician. I actually find this very important. What we actually find in my own research is that one of the first, research notes I actually studied, I actually found that inequality is one of the basically most concepts detrimental to your well-being and happiness, right? So indeed, we actually have a paper which is actually titled was Keeping Up with the Perception of the Joneses. So where we actually showed in the United States that it's not what you basically earn or value, it's how you perceive it. If you are perceiving that you are actually worse than others, this actually really makes you very unhappy, right?
Yeah.
And I think in the basically, having a, public policy where we have growth and people actually have jobs and greater, incomes, but also I guess it's gonna be important where the inequality is also lower. And I think, we can actually talk more, I guess, probably in the future about these Scandinavian countries, and also Australia is one of them also, where if also you look at those countries where the inequality is higher, you actually find them, people are also less happier, right? Mm-hmm. So in those cases, I guess these kind of policies are very important. And also, especially the working conditions of the people, right? Currently, as we know, people are actually talking about flexible working, how it's going to be, right? And there are different policies, and I think it's gonna be very important on having not only, in terms of the fairer wages, but also in terms of better working conditions. Indeed, my Ph.D. thesis, I actually showed that one of the biggest, determinants of happiness was, sunshine. So, and through that, I actually showed that in the, Denmark, UK, and Germany, and other countries. So, if you are staying indoors the whole time you are working, and if you cannot even, stay outside the top, this is really going to impact your happiness levels, right? And I think overall, there are actually different other policies that we can enact. But pretty much, I guess, if we are actually focusing on the policies and the effects on having, happier people and nation, I guess this is going to be much better from our community perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it starts with it starts with the big picture, but it also goes to what we do as individuals as well, right? And that's where it gets, I think it gets tricky, but it's also important to understand how tricky it is so we can do our part. And I'm very conscious of time, and we want to make sure we cover everything that we want to talk about. So we might just move on to the practice part in a little bit. But before we do that, how would you like to close out this part? I know there's so much more we can cover on this topic, but yeah, feel free to share with us anything that we might not have the chance to cover, and you think that this is super important. I need to highlight it for the audience.
Yeah, I think like especially I would like to mention about this, the individual responsibility as well for us as being a role model. I mean, I guess sometimes we actually totally forget about the fact that, okay, city councils has a job to do, public policy has a job to do, but as an individual, we also have a job as a role model, right? Personally, I can actually give some examples from my own life, but when I actually, teach my kids, or once we actually go to the park and just do the cleaning there, I actually see more people are involved and they actually do it more often, right? Or, once they actually help a person, I actually see others are helping as well. So overall, I guess there is a greater role of public policy that needs to be done, but also as a person, we are individually responsible so that, once we actually do for our community and do good, others are actually going to see that as well.
Definitely. I think that's so important. I think doing our part is one thing, but knowing that doing our part can actually, impact other people is a whole different thing. Because sometimes I see and hear when people are doing these wonderful things for their community, for society, they're kind of shying away from talking about it. And that's also another part that is important, right? Because we all have a role to play. And I guess the more you talk about these things, the more you inspire others to also take actions with you. Because I know and I can see that we all want to contribute. We all want to make things better. The social capital increases thanks to that. But it's just a matter of how we perceive it at the end of the day. Sometimes we forget, and sometimes we need a little bit of a reminder, and that's okay. And sometimes people take breaks from it. It doesn't mean that they're disengaged at all. It just means that maybe it's time for them to take a little break, and they might come back to it, or they might need some more inspiration to go back into the mode of, okay, I'm going to demonstrate my social responsibility. That's probably not what they're saying in their head, but something along that line of where, I want to be a part of this community. I want to feel belonged. And that in turn will boost their happiness, their well-being, and other people's happiness and well-being too.
Yeah, exactly. I guess from that point, especially, different awards or recognitions from the city level to the county level, that's kind of a very good reminder to people, what is actually value. And, sometimes we actually feel like getting one small paper might not mean much, but it does. And people actually, even though you actually say, this person is rewarded for their good actions, even though it's small, it actually, reminds you that, doing something good is important.
Definitely.
And such activities, I guess, definitely should continue around our communities, and people who do good should be rewarded and, recognized for their work. And also the community, organizations, everybody who is actually doing that. And of course, it's not purely about, giving recognition, but also reminding people as we,
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That recognition goes a long way because it acts as a reminder to others. And, they might feel inspired about it because they just need to see something good today. And then they're like, oh, I haven't done that in a while. Let me get back into that, For example, for me, like I used to be really active in the international students community space in Melbourne, and I volunteered a lot of my time there, and I had so much fun. But then, life happens, work happens, it gets stressful, and then I forget about it. But then the other day I was sitting down with myself and I saw all these wonderful things that Study Melbourne is posting about. And I'm like, oh, that's amazing. Now it reminded me, it's not that I forgot about it completely, but I needed a little bit of a reminder. It's in the back of my mind. And now that I saw the reminder, I'm like, okay, I'm going to find my way back into it and it will be fun again. So yeah, totally agree with you. And that's one of the many examples. I know that other people are passionate about other things too. And maybe this is their reminder today to reconnect with whatever it is that they want to contribute to, because we all play a part. And that's going to boost our own happiness, our own well-being, and other people's too.
Definitely. Yeah, a very good call.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so now we've covered a lot of the theoretical things, lots of big ideas and big insights there, lots of research too. Let's get a little bit more practical. Let's go into our practice debrief. I wonder, for you particularly, because you're really deep into this area, you study it, and you work with people on the daily, talking about this probably more often than you talk about, I don't know, whatever it is that you're interested in, like soccer. So I'm sure you have your own practice when it comes to this area. Which practice do you personally employ to improve and nurture your social responsibility?
Um, what I actually personally do is, I was frequent immigrant, I would say, because first I immigrated from Turkey to USA. Then from there, I actually immigrated to here. And one of the things is, since, starting from, my Ph.D., I was very much involved in student clubs, like you basically mentioned, and especially like trying to help other students and, people who actually come to country just, newly. And this is, I guess, a great example of what I did. And also, since coming to Australia, I actually see that, Australia actually needs, also much more community organizations and people helping other immigrants, getting their life. And as I told you, this also, I have done a lot of research on, how to basically, sustain greater integration of immigrants into society. And I've been involved in several community and social organizations here, not only about immigrants integration, but also from refugees work and so on. This is how I engage myself. But also I am very much involved in intercultural, activities and studies. I actually believe that this is actually a very important, role as a, measure of social capital. As I told you, if you actually look at the number of organizations, it's very important. But also, involving there and, like trying to do good at different levels. You can be actually a volunteer, you can be, a board member, you can actually, just go and maybe, help with their finances, right? So you can actually donate in several ways, but I have been actually very much involved at the student organizations, organizations helping refugees and immigrants, but also with, intercultural activities as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's really wonderful to hear. And I think, I guess, as a practice for myself and others, what I'm learning from this is, sometimes it's good to reconnect with, who you are, because that's so important. Being a part of our society is not about, okay, I'm going to do this because other people are doing that. It's more so, what am I most connected to, and where am I going to be most valuable in terms of my contribution? Because we can all contribute in our ways. Obviously, staying engaged, staying connected to whatever's happening is great. Probably not everyone wants to donate blood or is used to that. But, there are so many other things that we can do. And I think that's where we should really reconnect with what it is that is most valuable to us, and where it is that we can really shine in terms of helping others. And, start small, right? And
Yeah,
takes a village.
I think especially, we are actually, I guess, much more luckier, I guess, these days, especially, the businesses, and the firms that we actually work on, they are much more aware about these concerns. And also they actually would like to attract people. I guess I actually talked about this happiness and, different relationships before, but it's actually also important that, for those companies, for instance, that invest in these kind of activities, what we actually have seen in the research is they actually attract the better and more productive people. Because as individuals, if I am basically a person who would like to, engage with the community and do good, I also would like to work in a company that actually values them, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And currently, for instance, at XERO, we actually do lots of stuff, and I actually see all of these reminders I would like to take in. Like, for instance, every, once and then, we basically just prepare sandwiches for a couple of hours for the basically kids. And I actually love them. I just go there and help with them. And, now you actually see these kind of opportunities being created. It's actually easier for you to engage, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Or you will actually see these lists of places that you can actually donate your time during a weekend. And you actually say, you don't need to make your, own investigations on where to basically volunteer. It's there. You just do it. So I guess, in a sense, I guess it's actually working both of us. But, in our life, we also, work in some firms and businesses. And now I guess this is also, in a sense, we can, take action in that case.
Yeah, definitely. Ah, beautiful. I really love that. And thank you for sharing it. And before we close, we have a part where we talk about open mic. I know you have a topic in mind already. Now the floor is all yours, Jahid. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, just connecting on this topic, I just would like to mention, I actually have done a lot of research, not only about the happiness and social capital, but about the marriage aspect of happiness, right? And I actually published several papers on this. And as I indicated recently, some of my recent work on this topic was also featured in a very large article on Psychology Today magazine, which is basically the one circulated around the psychologists around the world. And here I would like to take a couple of different, basically, I will say summaries that I like. For instance, one of my basically very interesting research, which was cited as Financial Times, we actually looked at how the happiness gaps between the husband and the wife affects divorce rates, right? So people were generally thinking, well, what's going to happen? So what we actually found is that if the wife is more happier, right, than the husband, then the relationship is perfect. But if the husband gets happier than the wife, then where the problem starts. And at the end, these wives are the ones who file for divorce. So we actually find that this is the case in 3 countries, Germany, UK, and also in Germany. So, and also Australia as well. So in these countries where the divorce are quite common, and I guess this has been a very important, finding this interesting asymmetry, because I can actually tell you that in my previous research, once I actually look at these gender gaps in, happiness around the world, we find that women are always happier than the men. In most of the population groups, employment groups, age groups, everywhere, right? So what happens is that women have this kind of expectation before marriage that I need to be happy for the man anyway, right? But now in the marriage, as we know, only a small proportion of marriages end up in divorce, right? But in those marriages, what happens is that if the women perceive as less happier than the husband, now they actually believe that something is not wrong because they need to be happier than the husband, right? And we can actually follow up and test this hypothesis using data, and that's what we find. We find that women are basically, are the ones who file divorce if they were less happier than their husbands during marriage, right?
Interesting.
And interestingly, what we find is that, the happiness gap, even in the first 6 months after marriage, can predict divorce. So which means that, it's basically already arranged what's going to happen at the beginning of your marriage. So it means that if both partners are equally happy or equally unhappy, then the marriage is good. But if the husband is happier than the wife, then actually this creates a problem. And sometimes, as I indicated, this can be at the beginning, but this can be dynamics, like throughout the marriage. Maybe the woman can become less happy. Why? Very highly likely due to maybe greater housework or more basically, working conditions. And as we know, there is greater gender gap in certain countries and the others where, women actually need to do the housework and the childcare as well. And on top of it also, the regular working. And I guess this is actually a good call to make it out that for those guys who basically would like to have happy, stable, relationships, make sure that your, wife is happier than you. And you can actually, indeed, I actually ask my wife how happy she is all the time on a scale 0 to 10. And she's saying 8, 9, 10. I say, all right, this is a good level. I actually take action accordingly. So overall, I guess, this is one of the topics that I was very interested in. And related to that, we also looked at, this relationship between marriage quality and happiness. Because on average, what we actually find is that around the world, people actually look at this, research. General finding is that, people who are married, they are healthier and they are happier than singles, right? But we know that not everybody is in the condition because some people get divorced, right? So what we find is that in our data, we actually looked at a variable called marriage quality. So we actually find how happy you are with your marriage, right? And we find that for a small proportion of people, indeed, they are the married people, they are less happier than singles, right? So it means that, marriage is not good all the time. So for this small proportion of people, it can be bad. And indeed, for these people, it can be bad not only for the happiness, but also for their health and also for their productivity. Because overall, some of the economics research finds that once you get married, you actually feel happier, healthier, but also more productive in your work, right?
Yeah.
But here we actually wanted to show that for this small proportion of people, I guess this is some complementary evidence to our previous research, which actually showed that, it might not be the case as well. So overall, I guess this is coming to our expectations that, overall marriages are actually good for happiness, but also there is some of them which might not be very helpful, right? And indeed, in our, research, what we actually find is that once we actually look at those people, especially the women and the men who got divorced, right? Indeed, after divorce, they actually got happier than the case that then they were. So, which means that they were not in a very good relationship. And after that, they got divorced, but they actually became happier, right? So I just wanted to actually take a note of this. If people are interested, they can actually have a look at. But, I think this is one of the most interesting, research findings in this area that I actually did with my co-authors, were showing that this happiness gaps between husband and the wife and how it affects your, divorce probabilities.
Yeah, definitely. Very interesting insights. I think this is new to a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. I actually recently I was also asked to have an interview about this from the New York University. They actually have their own newspaper from the students. They actually wanted to touch on it. And also, lastly, I just would like to briefly touch on, as we have been talking about this public policy, at the XERO, I also helped basically to start and create, I will say, a happiness survey for the first time ever in the world on small business owners, right? Indeed, I have been talking about this. There is greater data on different people and everything, but there is greater work to be done as well. And there is not even basically one data set which solely focuses on small business owners and their happiness levels around the world. And at XERO, due to our work, we actually, since I have been doing a lot of research on this topic, we actually engaged with our other friends, and we came up with, small business owner well-being report, and which I hope in the future is going to shed a lot of light and well-being taken into well-being budgets and show that. And what we actually find is that small business owners, on average, are much less happier than the average population. So as we know currently, around the world, inflation, right? And also all these economic conditions are putting a lot of pressure on small business owners, as they actually probably, as immigrants and also maybe people from different backgrounds, we will understand it. Immigrants are actually more like, and interestingly, we find that immigrants and women, are more likely to become small business owners recently. And now they actually have their own family life. Now they're also work life. And as small business owners, you also need to take a lot, right, on your plate. And now what we actually find is that in the recent years, we find that they actually are much less happier. And hopefully maybe the governments actually can take action. And also even they can take action for their own themselves, that they need to look after themselves, right? So here I just wanted to take on this point as the work that I have done recently. And hopefully I would like to continue this kind of, research, in my own area and life in the future.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds super interesting and, new insights for sure. So yeah, we are going to be excited to, keep an eye out for your new research and new work. And speaking of which, if our audience would like to find out more about you and your work, how should they do that?
Well, if they can actually just, Google my name, they can actually look at my LinkedIn profile. Just be a friend and follow up my posts. I also, basically, you can look at all of my research on my, own homepage and also Google Scholar webpage. So I think with the podcast, I actually have shared all of these websites with you. So you can actually post all of these links as well. If they are ever interested to learn about this, please feel free to email me and ask about my research.
Great.
Yeah, I always very happy to talk about it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing all your insights. I'm going to definitely look you up on LinkedIn and connect with you and follow your work. And hopefully our audience would do the same. And well, it's been a great conversation. I know that there will be so much more that can be covered. So hopefully we'll have you back some other time and talking about some other aspects of it that we probably didn't get to cover. But yeah, thank you so much for being here and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation and looking forward to more interviews in the future. Cheers.
You have been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.